Hopefully this will record the whole thing this time. Okay, so to get started, we're going to look at how to start a new project, okay? There's a couple ways you can do this. You could either click on one of the, actually I take that back. If you click on one of the templates here, you'll actually go and edit the template. So don't click on one of these templates unless you actually want to spend time refining them, but you won't want to do that right now. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna click on new, okay? And you guys can do this at the same time if you want. Up to you on how, some people like to just watch this and then go back and do it themselves later. I find that I get a little distracted if I try to do it and watch at the same time. So just depending on how you work. So when you click on new, all right, you're gonna have, the first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna select a template file, okay? And what a template is it's kind of like a starting ground for your Revit project. So in my office, we actually have a template that we've created as an office. It's kind of a little project boundary on how we like to work as an office. So we already have a bunch of sheets already set up, so all we gotta do is just drag and drop the views onto the already pre-made, pre-set up sheets. We have all of our like line work and stuff already imported into it, kind of like if you had a template for AutoCAD that already has all your layers and whatnot. That's essentially kind of what it is. So Revit gives you a few basic templates, and feel free to go through and kind of look at the differences between the two. We'll use architectural. It's fairly simple, fairly basic template that has a few sheets already set up. It has a couple nice datum points already set up. Other than that, it's pretty simple. Construction's also simple, but they have a lot of datum points like bottom of foundation, bottom of rebar, and we don't really need all that kind of stuff in this class. So we're gonna go ahead and click on architectural template, or you could browse for a custom template that maybe you created. So, but we won't be doing that in this class. So we'll click on architectural template and we'll go ahead and hit OK. It might upgrade something. If it does that, just let it do its thing. It's okay. Okay, so a part of this template is that you have a few views already set up. Okay, notice that you have level 1, level 2, and a site plan. You also have a reflected ceiling plan, level 1 and level 2. You also have 4 elevations already set up. So for those of you that are familiar with reading architectural drawings, you're familiar with these being your elevation tags, okay? So once you start building in kind of this general region here in the middle, you're gonna start to see your elevations take shape, okay? So whatever you build in the middle of those elevation markers, you'll see on your elevations, okay? So the north elevation being up and east, south, west, okay? So that's one nice little feature of this template, is that it already has all your elevations set up, and it actually doesn't come with any sheets, but we'll talk about sheets another day. All right, so that's going to be the architectural template. Sorry, my mouse is a little jittery. I don't know why it's so slow. So that's the architectural template. Let's see what I had next on the list. Whew, sorry, my mouse.
How do you get it to dock to the right? I can't get my...
How do you get the properties palette?
Yeah, I'm trying to dock it to the right, but it's just...
You should be able to grab the properties, or like this, and if you pull it closer to the left, it should start to kind of grab.
Yeah, it's not working for me.
I'll come look at it in a few minutes. So let's see. Let's go back to what we were doing here. So let's look at some basic, just basic fundamentals of drawing walls. Okay. So we're going to go up to the architecture tab, and we're going to click on one of 3 options, and we're going to click on wall architectural. Okay. So right now, by default, we're working in a plan view. Okay. Remember, when you're working in a plan view, that Revit automatically by default cuts the plan at 4 feet. So you're really working 4 feet above grade, or the level 1 datum point. Okay. So as you're drawing, what you're seeing on your screen is at a 4-foot cut line. Okay. So I just clicked on my architecture tab and I clicked on wall. And if you go over to our properties palette, you'll notice that if you click on this first little button right here, it's going to give you a whole bunch of different types of wall types, okay? These are pre-made wall types that come in the template, all right? So that's another thing that a lot of companies will put into their template, is they'll put their wall types that they use a lot. So mine, we do a lot of wood stud framing. So I have all these different wall types that have different sizes wood studs, that have all these different variations of walls. And what each of these is composed of is it includes the stud, and it'll include all of the layers of the wall. So you might have gypboard, you might have paint, you might have plaster, you might have brick. I mean, there's all the different little layers that you would have in a typical wall assembly are composed inside these wall types, okay? Some are a lot more complex than others, okay? So these first probably 6 are very complex. So exterior brick and CMU on metal stud, there's probably like 8 layers on that thing. But if you scroll down, you're gonna have a few that are nice and simple. You're gonna have one called generic 5-inch, 6, 8, 12, and what that is, and I personally like to use them when I'm doing just basic design. It's just a basic wall of a certain thickness, and that's all that you're establishing. So you're not really getting into all the different layers of the wall assembly, okay? And because really when you're doing design, when you're doing real early design, that's not really important at that time, so, or at least to some people. So that's why these are there. There's just a general thickness of wall, and that's how graphically it'll be displayed on your screen, okay? And there's a few others as well, interior, interior partitions. You also have curtain walls, storefront. We'll talk about all of those a little bit later. Soffits, etc., etc. So let's go ahead. I'm going to click on generic 6-inch wall, and that's going to be what we'll kind of use to practice today. So looking below where your little selection tool, where you can select your wall type, we're going to be working with a group of constraints, okay? And these constraints are very important all the time when you're working. What you're saying is before you start drawing is you're saying where the bottom of the wall is and where the top of the wall is, okay? So if I'm going to go to an elevation just real quickly, and you'll see that we have a couple of very basic datum points, okay? We have a level 1 and a level 2. Level 2 is at 10 feet, level 1 is at 0, okay? So how did I get to where I am here? I clicked on my elevation over here. So if you go over in your project browser, you'll see east, north. You'll see east, north, south, and west. If you just click on them, you'll see the same thing in all of your elevations. We haven't built anything yet, so all you're going to see is just your datum lines, your level lines. And we'll talk about how to create those and what those mean here in just a few minutes. So,
double click it. It just opens the view.
Yep, just double click on the view and it'll open it up.
Thank you so much.
Sure. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to wall. I already have generic 6-inch selected. And we're going to look at something called location line in just a few minutes and what exactly that means. Also very important. But for now, we're just going to look at what our constraints are. So by default, it says level 1 is the base constraint, meaning the wall you're building is going to start on level 1, okay? And it's going to go up to an unconnected height of 20 feet. So what we're doing here is there's actually not a top constraint defined here. Typically, I like to define the top constraint. So we'll say, for example, the top constraint is level 2. That means when you draw that wall will be 10 feet tall because level 2 starts at 10 feet, okay? Right now, when it says unconnected, what that means is you can simply just define a height and it will draw at that height, okay? So it's an easy way. But the reason why you would pick constraints is, let's just say, right now, your level 2 constraint is 10 feet, okay? Let's say you're doing a residential building or something, and the city says you can build it 10 more feet, okay? So all your floors get a little bit bigger. Now your level 2 datum point, we'll say, is at 12 feet, okay? So you've already built this model. All your floor-to-floor heights are 10 feet, but then you get the okay to build 12. Well, I can go over to my elevation, change the level 2 datum point to 12, and it'll automatically take all of your walls where the top constraint is set to level 2. It'll automatically bring them all up, okay? So you don't have to go through and pull them all up to the next 2 more feet. If you have a top constraint established and it's not unconnected, it'll always keep that dimension in place, okay? So that's just a little bit about base constraints and top constraints. Just below both the base constraint and the top constraint, you're going to notice, I'm going to go ahead and put this on level 2. so that you can see what I'm going to talk about. You'll notice something that says base offset and top offset, okay? Let's say you want your wall to start on level 1, but you actually want it to start 3 feet above level 1, okay? You don't want it to start exactly at grade. You want it to start 3 feet above grade. Well, I can add 3 feet to my base constraint, and it'll start to build that wall 3 feet above grade and still maintain whatever that top constraint is, okay? So the top offset would work the same way. If you don't want it to go exactly up to level 2, maybe you want it to go a foot below, your offset would be -1, okay? If you want it to go a foot above, the offset would just be 1 foot, okay? So you have the ability to either go directly up to your constraint or plus or minus whatever dimension you want, okay? So just a little bit about constraints, all right? So the next thing we're going to look at is we are going to look at location line, okay? Location line is super, super, super important, okay? And if you click on location line, you're going to notice that you have the option to draw your walls either at wall center line, core center line, finish face exterior, finish face interior, core face exterior, core face interior. Wow, that's a lot of options. Well, what is the difference between, all 6 of those? Well, if I start drawing my wall, I'm just going to draw a couple random shapes here. My location line, I can also set a lot of those same parameters. I can set a few of them up here as well. But right now my location line is at wall center line, okay? So if I start drawing, notice that there's a little blue, you can barely see it, there's a little blue dash line that runs right through the middle of my wall, okay? As I start to, let's say I want that wall to be 6 feet 7 inches, and then I go down, notice that that wall, as I draw it, that blue dash line stays in the middle of the wall, okay? So that's, sorry, that's I told you I was gonna lose my voice. It's gonna happen right now. Notice that that blue dash line is staying in the middle of that wall, okay? So the key thing about this is you're thinking that's probably, what's the big deal about that? Well, if you were to go in and you were to edit that wall type, and let's say that wall got bigger, maybe it got smaller, it's always gonna retain that location line. So if your interior of your wall gets bigger or it gets smaller, it's always gonna keep that center location line, that wall center line, okay? So that little pivot point will never move. So the wall will consistently grow bigger on the outside, but that line, where that blue dash line was, won't ever move. Where this becomes really critical, a lot of companies, or I'll use my company for an example, when we do our construction documents, we do all of our dimensions from outside face of stud when we're calling out our dimensions, okay? Well, right now, as a generic wall, basically this is a 6-inch stud. That's all it is. We're not showing any finishes. Well, if I were to actually draw my wall, we'll say we're going to change this to core face exterior. Notice that that blue line right there is now, you can barely see it, but it's right there on the top. It's on the outside face of the stud, okay? So if I want to draw, let me get rid of this. Let's say I want to draw a 20-foot wall. I'm going to go ahead and go up. Notice that you still have, you can barely see it, there's a blue line right there. And I now want to draw that wall 20 feet. So I type in 20 feet, okay, and then I go down. I know my outside face of stud to outside face of stud dimension is exactly 20 feet. If we did wall center line, it'd be a little bit different. If I punched in 20 feet, it would actually be 20 feet from center to center. So you have to think, depending on how you work, of what that means, okay? So let's take this a step further. Right now, this generic wall is simply 6 inches, 6 inches wide, okay? Let's say I go through, let's say that this has cement plaster on the exterior, and you go through and you end up changing that wall, okay? I take this wall and I'm gonna change it to something other than generic 6-inch. Let's maybe go up to one of these exterior walls up here. Notice that Here, let me show you guys how to see all of the layers of your wall. Here we go. So I went down to detail type and I clicked on medium, and that will show you the different layers of your wall. Let me back up just one time. Okay, so this is a generic 6-inch wall. I'm going to go through and I'm going to change it to this wall system right here. Okay, so when I did that, something that it maintained was that outside face of the stud did not move. Okay, the finishes were added to on the outside face of the stud, but overall that location of that stud did not move. It's still 20 feet from outside face to outside face. Where if, let me show you an example. Let me just throw down a couple reference lines real quick, so you can kind of see where you'd run into a big boo-boo later on if you didn't make this mistake. So this is 20 feet right here. Okay, so I'm going to select all of these and I'm going to change it to brick over metal stud. Notice that the outside face of that stud did not change in location. Okay, now I'm going to go back and I'm going to change the location line to wall center line. Okay, so I'm going to go up here. Right now they're all in core face exterior. I'm going to change them to wall center line. So nothing moves here, but let's say that's the way that we originally drew it, okay? And now your boss comes along later and says, let's change that wall to a new configuration. All right, so I change it, but now look, that line is no longer on the outside face of the stud. That line is now actually on the wall center line. Regardless of the thickness, it completely changed though. That dimension from the outside face of stud to outside face of stud is not 20 feet now. So imagine having like, I don't know, 100 walls in your house, and they're all drawn at wall center line, and you change the wall type to something differently. Now next thing you know, every dimension in your entire project is now off by 3 1/8 of an inch or something really weird. So it's important to just kind of be aware of how you're drawing your walls. I prefer to draw all mine at core face exterior, okay? So that I know that when I am punching in dimensions, I know I want a 20-foot wall, I know I'm 20 feet wall from my outside face of stud to outside face of stud, okay? That's the way I like to work. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the way that you have to work, but it's just something to be aware of when you're drawing, okay? Any questions about that? Okay, and I'll bring it up more as we start to draw. Okay.
What would be the advantage if you did interior?
Interior?
Yeah, opposed to exterior. Like if you wanted your room size to be a certain size rather than
exactly. So if you want a clear interior dimension of a bedroom, you want exactly 10 by 12. Right. You could do interior face of. The thing is, if you do interior face of stud, it won't be clear that dimension. You would actually do interior face of finish, so that
when you add sheetrock.
You add sheetrock to it, you're going to have a clear dimension of what you're looking for. So depends on what you're drawing for. If you're drawing just framing plans and all you're drawing is studs, then some people dimension to the center line, some people dimension to the face. Just something to be aware of. Okay, let's move on to the next little topic. So let's look at how to create levels, and let's look at how to alter levels, okay? So last time when we clicked on the east elevation, okay, you can see here that we have a level 1 and a level 2 elevation, okay? Well, you're gonna be working where you're gonna need more than that. And what these act as is, when you create a new level, it not only gives you a new datum point in your project, but it gives you a floor plan, it gives you a reflected ceiling plan, and a structural plan for that level. So every time you create one, it's going to automatically create those new views for you, okay? There are ways to change it so that it doesn't do that, and we'll talk about how to do each, okay? So right now, by default, we have just level 1 and level 2. Well, let's say we want to add level 3, 4, and 5. We're going to do 10 foot level heights, but we want to add the 3 more. So we're going to go up to architecture, and we're going to click on level. And again, so architecture, down over to datum, you're going to click on level. All right. So we have 2 different types of datums that we can add. Notice that on these levels, how the the little grid bubbles are blue, okay? If the grid levels are blue, that means that when you create them, you're going to get a new floor plan over in your project browser, okay? If you notice that little grid bubble is black, that means that you created just a datum point that when you're drawing your walls, you can select it as a base constraint or top constraint, but you're not gonna, it's not gonna create floor plans for you. So it's just simply used as a datum, like top of foundation or top of, it's something that you wanna be able to select that height when building walls, but you don't necessarily need a floor plan for it. Because you might have a datum point at like 2 feet, 1.5 inch. That's a datum point that's important to you, but you don't need a floor plan at that height. So let's look at how to create those. So I clicked on level, okay, and by default, you're gonna see this little button that says make plan view. You're gonna see that checked, okay? So by default, when I draw this new level, it will create a floor plan, a ceiling plan, and a structural plan. If you click on the little button that says plan view types, you can check or deselect certain plans that you don't want. So maybe I don't actually need a structural plan. Maybe I don't even need a reflected ceiling plan. So I'm gonna go ahead and uncheck that, and all I want is a floor plan. So I'll hit OK, and I can start to draw in another level line. Okay, so notice as I hover my mouse over the old level 2, or the current level 2, notice that it's giving you a little tick mark of what that dimension is. Okay, so if I want to draw another level directly or exactly 10 feet above level 2, I could probably hover my mouse and get it to say 10 feet, which I just did. It's pretty easy, okay? And the closer that you zoom in, okay, the closer that you zoom in, notice that your increments of how much the level goes up, it starts to refine itself more and more. So as I zoom in now, I have increments of 1 inch, whereas if I go out, I only have increments of 6 inches. So the closer you zoom in, the tighter your increments will grow, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and go up to 10 feet. I'm gonna go ahead and click, and I'm gonna go ahead and draw that level line in. Notice that when I bring the level line all the way to the edge, notice that it snaps to the other ones, okay? It wants to keep those all nice and aligned, nice and neat, and it'll snap to that dimension. You may not be able to see it on the screen, but if you're doing it, you'll notice that it snaps, okay? And you'll notice that a lot with Revit. Revit kind of, it looks for relationships with nearby objects, with nearby lines, nearby walls, and it tries to establish that relationship, and it tries to kind of make the decision for you. It thinks it knows what you're trying to do, which a lot of times is actually correct. So you'll notice how that when you draw that, your walls will kind of start to come together in certain ways because it thinks that's how you're trying to draw it. All right, so I go ahead and click. I'm going to hit escape, and notice that we have the blue level head. So I have level 3 at 20 feet. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go up to level, click on level again. But this time maybe I don't want a level 4 floor plan, okay? Notice that when I added level 3, notice that in my project browser, I now have a level 3 floor plan, okay? So, but I don't have a ceiling plan or a structural plan because I unchecked those. If I uncheck make plan view, okay, so we're gonna uncheck that. I'm gonna go ahead and draw one more in at 10 feet. It's gonna give me level 4, okay, it snaps. I hit escape a couple times, 30 feet, level 4, but notice that the head is black, okay? But I don't have a level 4 floor plan, all right? But if I go draw a wall, I can select level 4 as a datum, as one of my constraints, all right? So that's the difference between the two. You can create as many levels as you want, and you have the option of either making them floor plans or not making them floor plans, okay? Let's look at another way to create a level, all right? So I'm gonna go ahead and click on architecture, level again. I'm gonna make it level 5, but this time I want a floor plan. Notice up here in our little box that says draw, okay? Notice right here to draw, you have two options. You either have a basic line, which is what I did the first time, where I just simply drew in my level, and I also have a little button that says pick lines. Pick lines is the same thing as offset, okay? So for those that use AutoCAD, use offset a lot, it's the same thing as offset. So I'm gonna click on pick lines, and then under offset, I'm gonna go ahead and type in 10 feet. Okay, so 10 feet, and I'm just going to bring my mouse over to that level line, and notice that it's projecting the next level 10 feet above that level line. So you'll use pick lines all the time. You'll use it whether you're doing levels, whether you're doing walls. If you need to offset a wall, you know, you're doing like a real tight grid apartment or something like that, where you you know all your kind of configurations, you can offset all your walls really easily. So that's the advantage of pick lines. It just basically works as offset. Okay, so depending on how much I move my mouse, I can move it down just a tiny bit, and it'll actually, now it's just hovering over that level. But I'm going to go up, so I'm just going to kind of just move my mouse just a little bit till it moves it back up. Click, and I now have my level 5. Okay, so a few more things about levels before we move on to the next task. Let's look at some of the different components of what we see around the levels. Okay. So when I selected the level 5, notice that you got one of these little blue dimensions, okay? You're going to see two different types of dimensions in Revit. You're going to see black dimensions and blue dimensions. Blue dimensions are dimensions that you can click on, change them, and it will move whatever it is that you have selected to that dimension, okay? So maybe I want level 5 to actually be 12 feet above level 4. Well, I select the level that I want to move. Could also be a wall, it could be a window, it could be whatever. But I'm going to select that line that I want to move. I'm going to click on that 10 feet, and I'm going to change it to 12 feet. Okay? So unlike AutoCAD, and this is a really nice feature, in AutoCAD, if you want to do something 12 feet, you have to type in 12 feet, right? So you do 1, 2 feet, and that would be, you know, 12 feet, or 12 feet 6 inches. You have to write in the little inches sign. Well, in Revit, you don't have to do that. If I just type in 12 and I hit enter, that will always mean 12 feet. Okay. If I just type in, let me go back. If I type in 12 space 6, that will mean 12 feet 6 inches. Okay. So you don't have to hit the feet sign, the inches sign all the time, because it gets really repetitive and kind of annoying. So you can just do 12 feet 6 inches, and that will automatically know that it's feet and inches. If you want to do something just inches, you would just do 0 space whatever. So if I want to move up my level 5 just 8 inches, I would say 0 space 8, and it moved it to 8 inches above the other level. Okay? Makes sense? Let's look at a few more things. So notice down at the end of your level lines, and a lot of this is just kind of what we're talking about now is more of annotative preferences when you're setting up your sheets. But notice that you have a little checkbox on both ends of your level line, okay? I can uncheck that box, and notice that that little bubble went away, okay? I can recheck it on the other side, and I'll get that bubble to show back up. Okay, I can have them on both sides if I want to. Depends on what you're working on. You might want all of your datum points all aligned on the right side. You might want them on the left side. I don't know why. Maybe you have a certain feature of your building where it's just in the way, and you just want them on the other side. So that's how you can change that. All right, I'll leave it as is.
Does it change anything else besides the bubble showing up?
Nope. Yeah, it's just a graphics thing. That's all it is. So I'm going to select on one of these lines one more time, and there's a little bubble at the end of this line. Okay, I'm going to grab that bubble and I'm going to move it in. Notice that right below it there's a little lock sign. So what that means is that all of the ends of those lines are all locked together. So if I move it in, they all move in. If I move it out, they all move out. Okay, if I uncheck the lock sign, I can move just that one in. Okay, so you have a little bit of flexibility, and a lot of times you do need to kind of move your lines around, your level lines, because they're just distracting, or they're in the way, or they're, you know, covering up something important. So you need to be able to have the flexibility of changing those. Okay, so that's it for level lines. Any questions? How to set up levels? Yes.
When you were explaining about the levels, symbols being low
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So if the level symbol is blue, that means that when you created that level, that you will have a floor plan associated with it. Okay? If you just want the datum point and you don't want floor plans, which you will, let's just say, for example, you're doing a 20-story residential building, stories 12 through 20 are all exactly the same, the layouts are exactly the same. You're not going to create a floor plan for every one of those levels because they're all exactly the same. So you can create datum points for all of them, but you don't necessarily need level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You're not going to have 20 floor plans in your construction document set. So if you want a floor plan, when you click on the level datum button, all you have to do is either check or uncheck the Make Plan View box, and that will give you that option. Okay? So that's a little bit about levels. All right. Let's see. I think we have one more important thing, or a couple more small important things. All right. Let's talk about creating wall types. Okay? So we're going to talk about creating wall types. So let's go back to my floor plan. I don't need this elevation anymore for the time being. So I'm going to exit out of that. The little X right here that will close that view just temporarily. It's still going to be in your project browser, but it'll close the view. Okay, so right now I'm in my level 1 floor plan, and let's look at how we can edit wall types. Okay, so I'm going to click on wall, and when you click on wall, you don't have to click on the wall then architectural. By default, it will always pick architectural. So unless you select structural, it'll always go to architectural. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a 6-inch wall. I'm going to go ahead and draw that in. Okay, so here's our 6-inch wall. The base constraint is level 1 and the top constraint is level 2. So I know if I go to my 3D view that wall is 10 feet tall. Okay, notice that if I click on the wall and I go and change the top constraint to level 3, that wall gets bigger. Okay, it goes up to level 3. Level 4, it gets even bigger. Okay, so that allows you to set your constraints. If I want it to start on level 2, I click level 2, notice that the bottom goes up. Okay, so that defines the top and the bottom of all of your walls. So I'm going to change this back to 1, and we'll make this level 2. All right, so I am going to click on that wall, and I'm going to go over to where it says Edit Type. Okay, Edit Type will always allow you to edit the specific element that you have selected. Okay, so I'm going to go into Edit Type, and let's look at a variety of different properties. These are all called type properties. Okay, these type properties will basically define what it is that your wall looks like, or maybe what it is that your table looks like, or your window looks like. It's all of the properties that will edit that particular object. Okay, so one thing to keep in mind is that remember that Revit is a global program. If I make changes, let's say I have 25 generic 6-inch walls, I have 25 generic 8-inch walls, and a handful of other types of wall types. Okay, so if I make changes to this generic 6-inch wall, and let's say I make it 8 inches or I add some different properties to it, it will change all of them in your entire program. Okay, so make sure you ask yourself the question, am I only trying to edit the one wall that I'm working on, or do I want to edit all of them globally? Okay, so if the answer is I want to edit all of them, then go ahead and just edit the one that you have. If you don't, and you only want to make a change to the one that you're working on, what you're going to do is you're going to click on the duplicate button. Okay, I don't want to edit the generic 6-inch. I want it to remain a nice generic 6-inch wall. So I don't want to mess with that one. So I'm going to go ahead and click on duplicate, and it's going to allow me to create a new one. So I'm going to call this generic 6-inch wall. I don't know. Let's see. We'll just say basic 1. So basically, you just want to give it some kind of a description so that you know what it is. So you saw some of the other ones earlier that said like brick over metal stud. So give it a little description so that you know what this is. I'm going to say basic interior. All right. So I'm going to say this is just a 6-inch wall and there's sheetrock on both sides. That's what we're going to change it to. All right, so right now it says the width of that wall is exactly 6 inches, okay? I'm going to ignore some of these other things right now. They're not really important to what we're doing. And under structure, we're going to click on edit, okay? This is going to be how we edit our wall types, okay? So once you click on edit, you're going to get this little dialog box, okay? You're going to get this little dialog box that allows you to build your wall type, okay? And by default, you're always going to have something that says structure and core boundary. The structure is another word for just saying stud. Okay, so that's always going to be your stud. Right now, this is a basic generic 6-inch wall. There's no properties defined to this wall whatsoever besides its width. Okay, so it's saying that it's 6 inches, and you have a core boundary on both sides of that stud. That means that any property that you add above the core boundary is going to represent portions of your wall type that is on the exterior of your building. Anything on the inside or below the core boundary, those are all going to be objects that will be on the interior side of your wall. Okay, so if I want to add, we'll just say gypboard to both sides of my wall, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on insert. All right, and it inserts it between the core boundaries. That's not what I want. You always only want one piece of structure. Unless, I can think of scenarios where you'd have more, maybe you have a double stud or something like that with like a air gap in between or something like that. So that would be an example of where you could have two pieces of structure between the core boundaries. But everything that we'll do, we're only going to have one. So I'm going to go ahead and hit up, and I'm going to move that above the core boundary. So now this is now something that's going to be outside of my stud. I'm going to change the function to finish because it is not sheetrock or gypboard is not structural. So I'm going to change that to finish. Okay. And by you selecting all of these little functions, it seems really like it's a lot of work to really create this one thing. But it's really important because when we talked about earlier how I had the concrete guy that would calculate how much concrete, well, this is another way that he can, someone like that could calculate how many square feet of gypboard or finishes you might have on the wall. So it's important to create all these things. And the nice thing is once you create it once, you're never going to have to create it again. So we're going to call that a finish. Under material, I'm going to click on this little box right here to the right. I'm going to click on that, and it's going to bring up a giant dialog box of all these different materials. So carpet, brick, shingles, copper, precast concrete, anything that you could pretty much think of. We'll talk about another day how to create our own materials, but for today we're just going to click on, I'm going to search gyp right there. So I got gypsum wallboard, okay? So I'm going to click on gypsum wallboard, and I'm going to hit OK. So now that material on the exterior side of that stud is gypsum wallboard. I'm going to give it a thickness. We'll say 5/8 of an inch thick, okay? And we're going to call it good. So I'm going to insert one more, and I'm going to go ahead and bring this down, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to make that a finish, and I'm going to select the same thing, gypsum wallboard, hit OK, give it a thickness, 5/8 of an inch thick, and I'm going to hit OK. Okay, so now notice that our old wall thickness was 6 inches, and now it's 7¼ inches thick. Okay, so we've now created a very basic wall type. All right, and if you click on some of the other pre-made ones, you click on edit type, look at them for fun, see what they're, and you'll see how they do actually get very complex. Okay, I typically keep it pretty simple in this class because I know we're not all in construction, and I try to keep it fairly simple. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Notice that it just happened very quickly, but it got a little bit thicker. All right, and I'm going to go back to my floor plan, and notice that that generic 6-inch wall now has a piece of gypboard on both sides. Okay, so now you can see that little piece of gypboard. And if you have more layers, then you have more layers, and you would see all of them. If you don't want to see those layers in that wall, you can click on that wall, and down here under detail level, you can change that to coarse, and it will always only show you purely just the thickness of the entire wall. Because a lot of times when people are drawing floor plans, they don't really want to see all of that. They just want to see one wall. So up to you. Yes.
Can you change it from being this color to the way you did it?
Which color?
It's white like that, it's black, but
Yeah,
white.
mine's going to have the same white
Yeah.
too.
that's
Okay.
it.
So yours is. I think it's
Line
this.
weight or-
Yep, it's this button right up here. So remember at the very beginning of class, I pointed out what this was. Okay, and this is a perfect example of how that changes it. Okay, so this is, if you were to plot this sheet on a nice big plotter, you're printing out construction documents, it's showing you what the line weight would be on that floor plan. But if I click on that little button up here that says thin lines, it makes the line weights all one, basically, the smallest possible, so that you could see all of kind of the layers coming together. But if you turn that on, you're going to see the actual line weights.
It looks like it doesn't show those lines, some of it.
Click on it one more time.
Could you
Oh, you're not seeing it because you have to change your detail level down here at the very bottom. Sorry, one over. To medium.
Thank you.
Sure.
What are the stud spacings? It's a wall.
Yeah.
I see that, but-
Doesn't so. That's actually a great question. So she asked, "What is the stud spacing on the wall?" Well, you don't actually build the stud spacing. You don't build every single stud. You're just building just the wall. Because for me as an architect, stud spacing, that's all contractors' needs and methods. I don't care about it. Someone might specify it in the plans that the stud should be every 16 inches off center, 18, whatever it might be. But you don't draw that in Revit. It's just you're just drawing the wall. Assume they're there.
You draw on Revit.
Yeah, just pretend they're there. Okay, so that's just some basic knowledge on how to create a new wall type. And the critical thinking exercise next week will be basically just about creating wall types. Okay? So let's look at one more thing.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Did you change the thickness of the gypsum board?
How do you change it?
Did you change it? The thickness?
I did. So what I did was, if I click on my wall, I click on Edit Type, and I'm going to click on Edit again.
Oh yeah, change it.
When you add the layer, it's going to come in at 0. So I had to give it a thickness. Okay. Okay, so that's going to be creating a wall type, and that's just for fun. Let's change this to something CMU on metal stud. This wall type is 1 foot, almost 1.5 feet thick. But if you click on wall type, you can notice all of these different layers. This is like an extreme one. This is a real thick wall type. But you can see it has a 6-inch metal stud, plywood, air barrier, air, concrete on the outside. So it's a real thick wall assembly. But what's nice is when you're actually drawing in the thickness of the actual wall assembly, it helps you run into design problems that maybe you wouldn't notice if you were just drawing just the studs. Because I know my office, when they draw floor plans, they draw only the thickness of the studs. That's one thing that drives them nuts about Revit, is they don't like seeing all those layers. But I like it because if my wall type is actually a foot thick when the stud's only 6 inches, that you could run into some issues if you're, depending on how you design and if you don't know how thick that wall actually is. So
And you can rename it from finish to whatever the heck you want it to be, right?
yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, when it comes to metal construction, metal buildings, instead of regular wooden studs, is there a way to make it look different, to have different pattern?
Yes,
for the metal?
absolutely. Let's talk about that. So what she's talking about is what we're going to talk about is we're going to look at the patterns, the hatch patterns inside of our walls. Okay, so when we draw, we have a hatch pattern for wood studs and metal studs, and so on and so forth. So right now, there is actually. Let me go back to the one that I had. Let's go back to. What's the one that I created earlier?
Generic 6-inch.
Basic interior.
Yep, there we go. So it's generic 6-inch basic interior. So I'm gonna go okay. I'm gonna go back to edit type. I'm gonna go back to edit, and I'm going to assign my core a material. Okay, so for now, let's assign it wood. So I'm going to type in, I think it's lumber. Softwood lumber. That's just basic, good old fashioned lumber. Okay, so I'm going to select that material right here as my material for my stud. And up here, if you go up to where it says graphics, this is where we're going to assign what graphics you see on that floor plan. Okay, so you have 3 different options: shading, surface pattern, and cut pattern. Your surface pattern would be what you would see in like elevation. Okay, so I really don't care about the surface pattern unless it's my outermost material. Otherwise, you're just never going to see it. And you also have your cut pattern. Cut pattern is what you would see in plan. Okay, so I'm going to change my cut pattern. This is what I'm going to see in this stud right here. Okay, I'm going to change that pattern to, let's see, I'm trying to remember what my hatch pattern is in my office. I think it's something like that. We'll just pretend that's what it is. Okay, we'll say it's the diagonal crosshatch. We'll say that's the hatch pattern. Can anybody correct me? Who's well versed in doing that kind of stuff? I'm a design guy, so I do construction documents sometimes. But anyways, we're gonna go ahead and pick on diagonal crosshatch. All right, and it's also saying what color do you want that hatch to be? Okay, probably black. And I guess you could, if you wanted it to be red, you can make it red. But usually your hatch patterns are going to be black. Sometimes I actually change them to gray so they're not so loud. Okay, so we'll say it's gray. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. I've now assigned a hatch pattern to that. I'm going to go to OK, hit OK again, and notice that that pattern is now inside my wall. Okay, and the reason why it doesn't look exactly the way that you saw it in the dialog box is because of the scale of the drawing. If I made this like quarter, notice how the scale of that hatch is getting bigger, or smaller, I mean. Half, now it's getting nice and fine. Okay, so that's how you would add a hatch pattern to the inside of your wall. Okay, now if we go to our 3D view, right now you don't see any patterns on the wall. So if you're looking at this wall, you would have no clue what it is based off of what you can see now. All right, I'm going to make sure that we're on medium. Medium, by changing the detail level to medium, it allows you to see hatch patterns. Okay, otherwise coarse is always just basic, white, you don't see any of that stuff. And then fine's a whole nother level. It shows like even more details that most of the time I have no interest in seeing. We haven't, I'll let you know when we run into a scenario where you could actually see it. I think right now you wouldn't even be able to tell a difference between medium and fine because we don't really have too much going on in our model. But let's click on that wall again, and I'm going to go to Edit Type, back to our structure, and I am going to add another layer. I'm just going to call this, we'll call this a finish as well. We'll just say it's brick. Okay, let's go up and select one of these bricks. Brick common. Okay, all right. We'll just say this is a couple inches thick, 2 inches. And I'm going to click on that material. I'm going to go over to graphics. Notice that I have a surface pattern of brick. Okay, and the cut pattern is diagonal up. So by default, all of the materials that are in Revit by default should already have the appropriate pattern associated with them, the typical ones. Some firms do things differently and they use different hatch patterns, and if you want to change them, you can change them. But they're basically saying the overall consensus is that most people that show brick in a detail or something like that, they're going to have a hatch pattern like that. So we'll go ahead and use it. We'll go ahead and hit OK, and we'll hit OK again and again. All right, so our wall got bigger because we added 2 inches to it. And if I go to the other side, this is the exterior of our wall. I now have a brick hatch pattern. Okay, because I added brick to the exterior of my wall. If I go down to realistic, now the wall actually looks like the brick pattern that we chose. Okay, so I'm going to look at it yet again. I'm going to go over to brick common. We're going to look at one more thing. We're going to go over and we're going to click on appearance. Okay, appearance is what you see in the rendered form. This little image right here, this is the image map that's associated with this material for a rendering. Or if you're doing like a view in realistic or something like that, that's what you're gonna see, okay, is that. All right, we'll look at how to edit that later. We can go into that even pretty far. But that's the image that you want to see. If you want to change it, you can click on the link. You can change it to a different brick if you wanted to. Maybe you have a specific brick company, and actually I do this all the time, that I like to work with. I'll import their actual image of their brick so that my renderings show their actual product. Why not? So we'll say okay with that for now, and we'll leave it at that. So that's just a little bit about wall types, okay? And how to build a few different types of wall types. I think there's just one more thing before we call it a day on the lecture. I think that's gonna be on how to export views, okay? There's two things in here that I wanted to originally talk about, but we're gonna talk about that next class. So let's look at how to export a view, okay? So we're going to go up to the little R symbol. And there's two ways we could do this. We could go over to export, and I could go down to images and animation, and I could click on image, and that would allow us to export a JPEG. Okay, if you want an actual image, okay, a JPEG. So you can set the number of pixels, and you can kind of go through all these different types of the quality of the JPEG, and you can set what you want, okay? Most of the time, I'm gonna use the print option. I'm gonna go to print, and I'm going to change this to Adobe PDF, okay? We're always gonna use Adobe PDF to plot, all right? So right now, let's just say this is the end of our residence part 1. Let's say that's what we had to do, is create that wall. I'm going to leave the print range on current window, so it's gonna print exactly what you see on your window, okay? You could also do visible portion of view if you wanna like zoom in on something and you only want like an actual portion of it. Or you can click on selected views and sheets. And by clicking on selected views and sheets, you could print multiple at one time. I could say I want to print all of my floor plans and views and elevations, etc. But for now, we're just going to print the current window. And I'm going to go over to settings. Click on setup. This is going to be where you can define your paper size. So for what we're doing now, we'll just use letter. That's fine. We'll look at some of the other paper sizes later. Okay, we'll leave it at letter. I'm gonna let it fit to page. If you wanted to print it to scale, you would click on zoom and it would go to 100%. We'll look at how to set up sheets at a later time though. Okay, this is all good for what we're doing now. So we'll click on center. It'll be nice and centered on the screen. It'll be plotted to a letter size, and we're gonna go ahead and hit OK. All right, and then I'll hit OK again. OK. It's going to say, where do you want to save it? You should save it to your thumb drive. I'm just going to save it to my desktop because I'll delete it. And it'll do its thing. I will let you know these computers sometimes are a little finicky plotting for whatever reason. So if you get a little hung up for a few seconds, just cancel out of it, do it again, because sometimes it just doesn't do it for some reason. Come on now. Wow. It's supposed to work during my demonstration. Try one more time. Yeah. Weird. It should. I'll try again in a little bit. I'll get your guys' attention again when I try again.
If it's in that Adobe PDF, do we just save it and send it to you something on Dropbox?
Yes. If you notice your image is super small on your sheet, click on visible portion of screen. So it'll actually only plot what you see on the screen versus if you actually leave it on current window and you have a whole bunch of other stuff going on the outside, it will actually zoom back out to get all of that. So you may want to try visible portion. All right, I think that's about it. Let me just look one more time. We talked about location lines. We talked about drawing walls. We talked about our base and top constraints. I think that's good for now. So let's look at the residence project real quick. So the first step is going to be to establish our levels of our for our residents. Okay, so you know what you get by default. You know you're going to get a level 1 and a level 2. You can adjust the level 2 to be that dimension. Okay, and then you can go through and you can add all the other ones. Notice that you have blue and black level lines. So there are some. We don't want a level 1 and an entry floor plan. Okay, they're the same thing basically. There's a couple inches difference. So you'll see the difference between the different levels. So you'll create some levels. These are all going to be your datum points for the work that we do. Okay, so then we're going to go ahead and draw a few walls. Okay, so I give you all of the dimensions for all of the walls. Sometimes I leave a few out because it allows you to kind of figure out what they should be. Don't get super hung up on if for whatever reason, let's say for example, this says 29, 9 3/4. For some reason you can't get it to be anything more than 29, 9 1/2. That's fine for this project. Yes, as an architect, I shouldn't be saying that. I should be exact, but for what we're doing, that's okay. Sometimes I see someone that's, they can get 7 feet right here, but they can't seem to get the wall to go to 7 1/4, and they spend half an hour trying to get that 1/4 inch. Just don't worry about it for now. We'll get better and more refined as we keep working. Okay. So how this works is you're going to notice a wall, and you're going to notice a number. So for example, wall number 1 is 5'4" from edge to edge. Okay, and this is going to be all of your properties for wall 1. So it says wall 1 is a 12-inch thick concrete wall. Okay, you can call your walls whatever you want. You don't have to call them exactly what it is that you see here. Basically, this is a 12-inch concrete wall. Whoever originally created this had some really funky names, I think, at one point. You may even still see a few of them. I tried to change them just to make them simple, but you may see some funky names. But basically, it's a 12-inch concrete wall, and that's what that is. Location line, use whatever location line you want. Don't worry about whether or not it says wall center line or outside faces. You do what you feel most comfortable with and how you like to work. I'd encourage you to work in whatever way you work in your professional life or however you want to learn to. So I give you constraints. So I tell you that the bottom of this is level 1 at 0, 0. The top is level 2. Nice simple wall. Okay, and then all of those base constraints and top constraints change for all the wall types. Okay, the difference between the gray walls and the white walls is that this plan that's on this sheet is cut on level 1. So some of these walls, for example, level 2, is actually below the cut line. So it's not shaded gray because we're not cutting through it. Okay, so you're actually you're cutting through walls 5, 3, 6, and 1, but you're actually looking down on walls 4 and 2. Okay, that's the difference between the two. Okay, so those are all your different wall types. There's a few different more, and it tells you step by step. Open the wet floor plan, and it says to select that type of wall, and it should give you everything that you need to start going. This may take you a little longer than you kind of expect. It's just I kind of like to just kind of let you go a little bit and just let you start to draw. Okay, and then next class we'll talk about some more techniques on how to draw walls quicker and how to establish dimensions really easily, okay, and some other stuff. But for now, this is pretty simple. I'll let you guys just go right into this. Don't worry about if your end result doesn't look exactly like this. I don't care what the surface patterns are. Whoever originally created this, they had 2 different types. If they're all exactly the same, that's okay too. Just don't get hung up. Main point is don't get hung up if it doesn't look exactly the same, okay? So go ahead and get started. All you got to do is just export a 3D image of your end of your work, upload it for exercise 1, and you're all done. So you guys have about an hour to work on this, and we'll be done for the day. Uh-huh. I don't know if they're open right now, because technically tomorrow's the official first day of class, but because this is a weekend class, we started today. But I'd suggest emailing it to yourself.
Oh, okay.
Okay? Or if you have cloud storage, you can upload it to that.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Awesome. Thank you.
Uh-huh. I'll leave this on the screen so you guys can kind of just reference it. Okay, and I'll walk around and help you if you need it. Any questions? Oh, let me stop the recording before I forget.